Most of the ancient myths that deal with a remote past are perceived today as some kind of folklore genre and pure fantasies that have no historical basis. However, the facts are such that many ancient legends and stories are actual memories of real events of our distant history. Even though myths cannot be taken literally because of time that inevitably leaves its mark, often transforming it to a very distorted echo of distant events. Some of them do have historical basis. One of such legends will be discussed in this video. It is interesting not only for its great antiquity and technical accuracy, but also for the fact that the technical data was received by people from some external advanced civilization revered by ancient chroniclers as the gods. One afternoon, the man came into the British Museum with the bag of objects that included this tablet. What Professor Irving Finkel noticed straight away was that it was in the shape of an old Babylonian letter. But it appeared to be not a casual letter, though. The writing begins like this: "Destroy your house, build a boat, burn property, and save life." Well, this was not what most letters begin with, and it was apparent that it's the most ancient writing about the Great Flood. But we should have started our story almost 200 years earlier, from 1872, when there was a curator in the British Museum called George Smith. He was a self-educated Assyriologist, and one night he was sitting in the museum reading the cuneiform script tablet. On one of the lines he read that the ark landed on mountains, and his eyes slid down and saw that hero released from the window a bird, and a bird came back. And then the second bird came back, and when he released the third bird, it didn't return. He suddenly realized that it was the equivalent of the Noah and the description of the flood in the book of Genesis. Back in 1872, everyone knew the Bible back to front, and especially its first book with the flood story. So when Smith made an announcement of his discovery in front of the Prime Minister and Archbishop, and when the news broke and first was published in the Daily Telegraph, there was tremendous furor. The manuscript that he had studied were dated back to 700 BC, so it wasn't that far away from the time people thought the Bible was started off. So it was a big problem. Which came first, the Hebrew version or Babylonian version? And this problem was so big that most of the researchers ran away from it and preferred not to continue the research. But then it was re-examined in the 2000s by curator of British Museum, Professor Irving Finkel. What he realized is that this writing was from the very historic moment of the world.
I start reading this thing and I realize it's from a very historic moment in the history of the world, because in Babylonia the gods met in parliament because they were fed up. They were fed up because the human race was very noisy. And Enlil, the chief god, obviously had been in this position of having lunch, sitting in his deck chair and trying to doze, and all the rumpus from below of the human buzz and noise eventually goaded him to such a point that he put his foot down, and they had a meeting in Parliament, and it was agreed that all life on the earth would be obliterated by a flood, and then after that they'd invent something which was A, more industrious, and B, more quiet.
There was God Enki, who was very clever and with a great sense of humor. He made his decision to leak this information to humans. So he, like God in the Bible, picked up one man in order to tell him what is going to happen. When Smith's tablet was published, the whole narrative from the story from the Assyrian library and the whole narrative from the book of Genesis were so parallel that it was hard to deny its similarity. The one contrary argument, though, was that they couldn't be related, because in the Bible the shape of the ark was a coffin-like vessel with narrow sides made from wood. And in Smith's tablet, the ark looked like a cube. But in the tablet that was brought to Professor Finkel, it was even more interesting. The name of Babylonian Noah was Atrahasis, meaning extremely wise. Despite that, the god Enki didn't trust Atrahasis to figure out ark himself, and told him that he should draw out designs on the ground and that it should be a round boat. It was a very surprising discovery, but in fact something that has a historical proof as well. because in the Iraq region, riverine communities had round boats they called coracle, or round boat for ages. But what was even more interesting was that there was data in the tablet that outlined the procedure and material needed to build this boat delivered directly from God Enki.
I can tell you some specific pieces of information. The base area of this coracle was 3,600 square meters. Okay, I don't know if anybody here has ever built a large coracle, but if you're a bit shaky on the detail, if you had such a coracle and you lowered it from a helicopter onto a football pitch, it would stretch for at least half the pitch. We know from the tablet, Enki was explicit, the size of it and the height of the walls, which were 7 meters, and various other things. Now, the procedure explained from heaven to this chap, and what Enki explained was that to make this circular boat, you lay out a circle of rope on the ground of the right diameter. And you lay it out in a circle, and as the circle comes back to the beginning, the next layer goes on top. And as you go round, it's stitched from north to south, so you end up with a big floppy basket made of rope. And once this has happened, you have to cut the ribs to fit the profile inside, and they come from the top lip inside the kind of the vessel, and they interlock to make the floor. And when you've got that, that is lashed to the basket, so you have some stability. And then finally, it's bituminized from head to foot. It's waterproof with bitumen.
When Enki gave the dimensions and the instructions, he told him how much rope, wood, and bitumen he would need. And this information is astonishing. It is astonishing because of one thing.
All the figures make sense. So you imagine building a coracle, a primitive boat like a coracle, according to dimensions given by a god in 1800 BC, or written down in 1800 BC. All the measurements make sense.
One lucid example. Enki says to Atrahasis, you'll need 40,420 sutu of rope. If you put it in our equivalent of modern days, it'll be London to Edinburgh. Now, the thing is this. We have the height of the walls and the diameter of the object. We know that the rope is finger thick because it says in the tablet. So if we have these data, we can now check what is the actual amount of rope we will need.
And I said, look, this is the postulate, and I thought that was a very smart word. We've got this shape, we've got these dimensions. If the rope's a finger thick, can you work out for me, in Babylonian sutu, how long it would be? And he did. And the result was so astonishing that he did it several times. We checked everything and everything and everything. So you remember, perhaps, that we had 14,430 sutu according to the gods. If you do it according to my friend Mark, you need 14,624 sutu. In other words, the difference between the number bestowed by heaven and the real number is less than 1%.
It is not a coincidence. Apparently, all quantities of bitumen and other materials are calculated and adjusted according to the size of the ark. So it could be done, actually. In fact, the ark from Babylonian tablet was built in a slightly smaller scale by Professor Finkel in India. As a fully operational vessel, it was tested at some local river canals. Discovered round profile of the ark solved another question. Round form of vessel with the cabin on top could also explain why the ark was illustrated like a long vessel by some artists using the Bible as their prime source.
But basically, no one paints the thing in the Bible. So why is it that the painters, who are both working from one resource only, which is the text of the Hebrew Bible, one is pure invention and the other is literally correct? It raises the interesting possibility that, in fact, what they are doing is painting a round vessel from the side. That might be true, that there might have been a lingering, persistent tradition that the ark was a round boat and they couldn't paint it in any other way than from the profiles.
Another interesting reference to the ark was found in the ancient Babylonian map of the world. The land inside the circles is Mesopotamia, and the circles inside are the names of the tribes of people who lived in Iraq. The blue river that goes around was described as the river of bitter water. and there are 8 mountains on the rim of the world. This tablet was in the British Museum since the 1880s, but no one really understood it. On the back of this tablet there are 8 sections, and each of these sections described what is on one of these mountains.
Where that yellow pointer goes, it says in the Babylonian, if you go across the river or the distance, you come to the mountain where, and it says its wooden ... there's a word that's not complete, are as thick as a parsectu. Now, a parsectu is not a normal measure, it's a volume measure. And it's quite strange to say something is thick as a volume measure. It's like saying thick as a barrel or something. And obviously this is a kind of idiom in Babylonian, some kind of expression that people knew without examining its meaning too closely. And the thing is, this was never attested in any other document at all, this expression, until the tablet came into the British Museum, which I wrote the book about. Because in that tablet, Atramhasis, doing what Enki told him to do, stands in front of him and says, I cut the ribs as thick as a parsectu. Like that, right in the middle of the tablet, this same line.
So what that means is the man who made that map knew that flood story and the quotation, and he knew which of the mountains around the edge of the world was the mountain that, according to Babylonians, their ark came to rest. It turns out that the mountain where the Babylonian ark came to rest on the map is this one. It has the same writing as on the back of the tablet.
In this map, the first territory that you meet when you come back from that mountain is called Urartu. And Urartu is the ancient name of Armenia. And we know that because the Assyrians were big enemies of theirs, and there are lots of texts which describe battles and all sorts of trouble with them. In the Bible, in their version of the story, it says in the Hebrew that the boat came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. And everybody seems to think, for some reason it's translated this way, that the boat came to rest on Mount Ararat. But it doesn't say that, it says in the mountains, plural, of Ararat.
So the thing is, when the story eventually, as it did, went from the old Babylonian story into the text of the Bible, the basic outline of the narrative was adopted even to the point that the boat landed not on a mountain, but mountains. Now, there is one particular mountain region in Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan that is incredibly important for both nations for religious reasons. It is Nagorno-Karabakh, the center of relentless wars and dispute between these countries. Unfortunately, today the region from where our history might restart now is the place of never-ending death, suffering, and sorrow. So the work of Professor Finkel proved a very important thing. Ancient legends are not just compelling stories, but could be an actual source of technically accurate data and information that do have historical basis. It is also an evidence of influence of some third party engaged into human affairs since a very ancient time. Some extremely ancient and very advanced civilization that was revered by our ancestors as the gods.